It's Johnny Quach. I get a ton of messages asking me for career advice and interview tips. So I thought I'd make a video just answering some of the more common ones. And I'm going to keep making these videos as long as I keep getting interesting questions. So if there's any questions you want me to answer, feel free to write it in the comment section. And if you have any feedback on how I can make these videos better, please feel free to share it with me. I'd love to hear it. So with that being said, let's get to our first question. How to apply for an entry-level product manager position that is really rare. So that's absolutely true. Entry-level product manager positions are really rare, and there's a reason for that. Most of the time when companies are hiring for a product owner or product manager role, they're looking for someone to take on a lot of responsibility and finish some specific project or some specific area or optimize some metric. And typically, you can't really rely on a very junior person with very little experience to take that amount of responsibility. So typically, the entry product manager positions are ones where they take a small piece of a bigger product or a small piece of a bigger feature and then just hone in on that. So just understanding that context is really important. Now, why are these jobs rare? And the reason they're rare is because product management as a discipline or a department hasn't been around that long. I don't think it's even been around as long as I've been alive. In reality, it's only become much more popular in the last 25, 20 years or so, right? So with that being said, there's not a lot of classes and education around it. There are classes these days, but very little compared to like 20 years, a lot more than 20 years ago. So they're just really rare and the education around it isn't like common. I think that's obviously changing and the popularity of the role is growing bigger and all that kind of stuff. So now how do you stand out for a role in which you don't have a lot of experience doing, and that's very rare. So the first thing is, if you come from a background that shares some similarities with the skill sets that are needed to be a product manager, obviously you can leverage a lot of that. Now, the obvious kind of connections are if you have an engineering background, a design background, a project management background, a consultancy background, like these kind of things, they all kind of like really, really leverage well into a product manager position. And the reason for that is within one product manager's role, there's probably kind of four, let's call them pillars or corners in which you can operate in, right? So product managers typically have these kind of four areas of expertise. Number one, they understand technology. That means they don't need to write code. They don't need to be able to code something up, but they really need to understand code and they have to be able to at least think through engineering problems. Now, the second part is design. Once again, product managers don't actually have to design themselves, but they have to be able to look at a design and think about it from a UX and UI point of view and really give valuable feedback to designers. The third thing is product owners should typically have some key understanding of business strategy and how that kind of works in like a marketplace. So you might be working in a company and you just kind of understand where that sits in the existence of all businesses in the same space. So having a good business strategy understanding is very helpful. And the last thing, which is not traditionally a skill set you can learn in school or whatever, and that's what I call influence. And that's just the ability to communicate on a one-on-one level, but also the ability to communicate and align a very wide group of people to kind of be focused on one goal. Now, those four things make up the perfect product manager. If there's one person who is doing all four of those things amazing, you have a killer product manager in your hands. However, most product managers are just good at one of those four things and okay at the other three, right? So when you become really good at all four of those kind of skill sets, you become like a director or a manager and you move forward in your career and you start managing people. But for product managers, just having one of those really strong and the other three okay, it's good enough. Now for entry level, you wouldn't be very strong at any of those. But what you have to do is have some minimal experience in all four of them. So just getting yourself familiar with engineering, design, business strategy, and the ability to communicate, those will help you a lot. Now, obviously, if your background already has one of those skill sets already, you can leverage that. But I think I'm going to tailor this kind of question, this answer to people who have none of that. That's the more challenging part. So I think it's true for most roles in which they're entry-level position, marketing manager, a designer, or maybe not designer because it's a little more execution, but like any kind of manager roles that are entry-level, you want to do this. You want to focus on two things. The first thing is you want to focus on kind of your passion and your interest for the topic. And I'll explain how to do that in detail. The second thing is You want to understand and show that you understand the landscape in which the company is in and what's going on in that environment and in that industry. So let's go into the details. So it mainly comes down to two things. The first is passion and interest. The second thing is thought process and strategy. Now, if you have zero experience, what you really want to do for the first point, spend a lot of damn time understanding what product managers do, what product ownership is, what that looks like on a day-to-day. Obviously, you've probably done that research if you're interested in the role in the first place. So now the key is to go one step further and understand what are the kind of frameworks, the thought process that a lot of product managers and product owners kind of think about. Understand that vocabulary, use those words, kind of get really familiar with that stuff. And of course, you want to show a passion towards this kind of role. It's a role in which you have a ton of responsibility, but not a lot of power. So how do you navigate through that, right? And for you as an entry-level person, what you really need to think about are what are the most shitty things about being a product manager and a product owner. If you understand that without doing the job, and you kind of mentally think about how you would solve for those problems, that's going to show that you at least have a key interest and you're really able to think about the role in a deep way. So for product managers, like as I mentioned earlier, you get a ton of responsibility, but not a lot of power. So how would you kind of operate on the day-to-day level with that knowledge? So in an interview, if you're able to express the challenges that you get as a product manager or a product owner, you'll kind of be able to maneuver and kind of navigate the conversation about those true problems. And when you show an interviewer that you understand the problems and the crappy part of the job and that you have a solution to it, you're definitely going to seem like a much stronger candidate. And you don't actually need to have done the work. You just have to really understand the problem. Now, the second part is also very similar. You have to be able to communicate your thought process. And your thought process can be powerful regardless of what your career is or what the job you're looking for, all that crap, right? The most important thing is you think about things in a fairly structured way, and you think about problems and solutions in a structured way. And the reason you want to start thinking about things in a structured way, it's easier to communicate and repeat that structure in an interview and in a conversation, right? So it's kind of the things you learn a lot in school, which is you want to start high level. You want to state the context. You want to kind of go for a summary of your answer. And then you want to go into the details of that. And then you want to kind of summarize it all up one more time to one key learning. So think about your thought process on how you're answering questions, but also in the interview, you're going to be asked to tell us what it is that's going through your mind. And just getting a lot of that practice in is really important. So one thing that I find really useful is you want to train yourself to be able to answer very open questions. Now, one of my favorite questions, which I ask to the most junior people I'm interviewing and also to the most senior people I'm interviewing, which is, if you were the CEO of the previous company you worked at, what would you do for the first 90 days? You have full control. Now, the reason I like this question is a lot of people don't ask it, so it's very interesting to see what people are saying. And obviously, I'm not asking for the perfect business plan or the perfect business strategy. What I'm looking for is, are you able to take a task so broad and consolidate it into some key frameworks and key insights and key steps that would lead you to a successful decision? I'm not asking for the perfect decisions, I'm asking for your thought process. So once again, the two things you gotta think about, and you gotta be really, really well rehearsing it. Your ability to be passionate and your ability to be interested in understanding the problems that product managers and product owners face. The second thing is, you have to be able to elaborate on your thought process. And your thought process has to be fairly objective, right? You want to be able to kind of consolidate all your thoughts into a structured manner. So those two things, I would say, is fundamental skills in any product manager's role at any level of the career. So once you get that, you're definitely going to stand out amongst other people who are interested in the position, but might not really think about the details of the position. So spend a lot of time understanding the role, spend a lot of time understanding the problem the role has, and focus your energy on that. How can one pivot from a different background into a product management role? Similar question to how you get an entry-level product manager role. But one caveat here, you have experience. So you're likely not trying to get into a product manager role that is a junior one. You're probably moving from, let's say, marketing manager or maybe designer or engineer into product manager. So not an entry or an associate level one, right? So the one difference here is you have to be able to go into the position and start solving problems right away. And if you have any kind of like professional or career background or experience, you're probably able to solve problems at some rate, right? And so if you're an engineer or you're a designer or something like that, you're constantly solving problems already. You're figuring out engineering solutions for complicated business logic, or you're finding the right UI to build for a complicated flow and things like that. So you already have, let's say, your thought process and your framework for solving problems. So now it's just kind of thinking about, well, what are the things that product managers kind of do and the way they think about things. And what you'll find is most roles in the entire world follow a very, very similar framework when they think about problems and solutions. And in reality, those are the only two things you really care about, problems and solutions. So with that being said, if you come from a different background, obviously you want to leverage all the commonalities that you have with a product manager role. So if you're an engineer, obviously it's the technology piece. You're like, hey, look, I really understand technology. I can solve technology problems. And with that kind of framework and thought process I use to solve engineering problems, you can apply almost one-to-one to a product manager problems. And that is the key. You want to be able to find those commonalities that you share, and then you want to leverage that a bit heavier. And then most people do that. However, then the next step is you have to layer on the business strategy part. Now, the business strategy part, which is kind of a vague idea, it is the most lacking skill set that most product people I've ever interviewed have. It's also a lacking skill set that most people in a company lack, right? So what I mean by understanding of business strategy is when you look at the company, are you looking at the whole company objectively in their position in the market? Are you looking at all the trends and all the macroeconomics that are happening in the world and how that affects this company? Are you looking at all the key forces in the in life and things and change and trends and politics and all this? And do you understand how those things force your company into some direction? And if you spend the time to think really wide and you add that with your technical skills or your design skills or your project management skills from the past, that makes a strong product manager. Because even the best product managers, or not the best, but even okay product managers, are lacking an understanding of business strategy. Usually they're too focused on features or too focused on technology or that and that. But all product managers need a layer of business strategy on top of their thinking. That is what drives the few product managers to become really great ones, is the understanding of business logic and business strategy and positioning and marketplace dynamics. Those skill sets are rare. So if you have a strong technical background or a strong skill set already, all you need to do is pair that with a strong business logic, business strategy background. So what you're trying to do there is you're trying to understand all the things that are happening with companies in the tech space or any other space. You want to spend a lot of time understanding the industry that the company you're applying for is in, understanding what are the driving forces outside of technology, outside of design, but macro trends, right? My last two careers have been in travel. So for me, I have a pretty clear understanding of how tickets are sold, how much airlines make on tickets, what is accommodation, what's the customer journey life cycle. I kind of understand all the pieces that have to do with travel and understand all the key players, right? From OTAs to meta search engines, to Google, to Facebook performance. I get a piece of all of it. And I kind of understand how all these kind of mechanics really impact the growth of business. And for you, that's what you need to know. You need to know at a high level all of those macro trends that are happening. So focus and leverage the skill sets you have, but spend a decent amount of time really, really understanding the landscape of the business that you're applying to. How to prepare for an interview regarding the knowledge and also the ability to wow or amaze your interviewer beyond the simple Google search. before I kind of get to the answer, what you kind of have to understand is when someone's hiring for a role, and it can be really any role in a company, um, there's typically two polarizing reasons why you would hire a role. The first reason is, well, we just raised a ton of cash or we have a ton of money and we're trying to expand, so we got to hire a lot of people and put them into seats. That's actually a pretty common reason. The second reason, which is the more interesting one, you're hiring someone to come and fix some huge, humongous, burning problem inside your organization. That company does not have someone already solving it. So they're looking for someone to come in right away and just get rid of that problem. Now, if the position that they are hiring for does not kind of sit, in one of these extremes, you'll find that the position they're looking for is kind of soft. So they're not necessarily serious about actually hiring for it. And so that's why a lot of roles and a lot of interviews that people go through, sometimes the roles themselves actually just disappear by the end of the interview because they realize we don't really need this role. So a lot of companies actually don't know certain roles are useful or not. But in reality, you want to actually understand what is that burning problem that this position is supposed to solve. If you understand that, that's going to be the catalyst for a strong interview, okay? So how do you find that problem now? Number one, if you know someone who works at the company, obviously you want to be reaching out. You want to be asking all the hard questions. What's the biggest problem you guys are facing? Do you understand what's the biggest issue or things that could be improved with this department that I'm applying for? Get that understanding. If you can't speak to someone who works in the company, do a Google search, look through Glassdoor, see all the problems that come up, truly understand the problem space, okay? So if you can't get to the granular level of a departmental and a role level problem, what is the biggest problem the company's facing? Because typically that problem rolls and kind of spreads into different kinds of problems that are all related into different departments. So if you can't find out what this specific role is solving for, try to understand what the company is trying to solve for. What are the biggest challenges it's going through right now, okay? So spend a lot of time understanding maybe the last fundraising and try to read and consume as much content that would tell you why did they raise that amount? What are they planning to do with that money? That's the key. Not the fact that they raised a lot, but what exactly did they raise that money for? And every time a company raises a ton of money or a little amount of money, there has to be specific reasons. Investors don't give money to companies unless the companies are really, really eloquent in the way they're going to spend the money. That's the key. Companies want to spend the money right away to get the impact they're looking for. So for you, understand what the last major event that the company went through and why, and what is the reason for that. Okay, so then you're gonna start with some kind of problem or vision or strategy, and you're gonna understand this through all the content you're gonna consume. Start there. Think to yourself, if I was the CEO, what would I do to solve this problem? Think through that idea constantly. And if you show a maturity in an interview to be able to address that problem and your ideas around how you would approach solving it. Now remember, I didn't say the solution. The key is to express your thought process on how you would solve the problem. Then you're going to really stand out amongst all the other candidates, because maybe what they're doing is they're researching about the company, maybe the history of it, maybe the recent successful growth or whatever. But what you're looking for is the problems that a company is facing. Either A, it's growing too fast and experiencing a ton of problems they gotta fix, or B, it's not growing fast enough and they gotta find a way to grow faster. Understand the problem, spend a lot of time thinking about how you would solve it, do your research on that, and frame a lot of your interview around those solutions. That's gonna make you stand out far beyond most candidates. At which point should you compromise the bar if the hire is urgent? I think it obviously depends a lot on the role. And I think it depends on what you're compromising. So I'm going to assume there's probably two kind of things you're measuring. Number one, is this person a good cultural fit? Number two, does this person have the strong technical skills for the role? For the cultural fit part, that's not the question you should be asking yourself. Is this person a good cultural fit? The kind of question you're asking yourself is, can this person be happy in this environment? And the pieces that they're missing for that cultural fit, is this something over time, just working with the personalities and the team that they're going to be in, would they kind of naturally adapt it, right? You might have someone who's, you're looking for some strong kind of entrepreneurial, high energy individual, but you meet a candidate who's super strong technically, fantastic resume, great thought process, strong critical thinking skills, but a little timid. So the question you ask yourself is, well, once I put this person into this role, into this environment, into this amount of responsibility, will they naturally evolve into that culture that's necessary? That's the question you should be asking yourself. You should think about that next evolution of the candidate in your organization. Because as we know, the environment you're in defines you by so much, and that whole thing, like, you're the average of your 7 closest friends. What's certainly true at work, you become, like a combination of everybody you work with, and you absorb all those traits. So is that going to kind of fill your cultural gap? So that's a kind of different way of thinking about it, but it at least opens your mind up to that, the possibilities, and maybe the hire isn't a bad hire. Maybe it's a person who's going to be evolving into that fit anyways. On the technical side, this is a little more difficult because it really depends on the skill sets. But what you're trying to understand is how fast this person can get up to speed and start executing on the role. If you feel like this person is kind of weak on the technical skills, but they would be highly motivated, they would jump right into the role, and they would start executing, this is probably a good direction and a safe bet to go, because most hires have a probation period, obviously. And what you're trying to do is you want to see and you want to give the chance to this person to really immediately start doing work that you can start assessing, right? And you can also even say in the interview and when you're making the offer, hey, look, we find your fit, we find you technically to be very strong. However, it's lacking on these things. We want to extend the offer, but we want to make sure that you're able to kind of deliver on these specific things and you're really going to grow in these areas. If you say that at the very beginning and you make it very vividly clear, that is what you're going to assess this person on in their probation period, there's no miscommunication. It's all straightforward, everything's on the table, and everyone knows what's going on. So try to think of it in that way. So for the culture one, will this person evolve into the culture fit? Yes or no? For the second one, the technical skills, is this person immediately going to start executing so you can actually assess their technical skills in real time, in a real environment? Those two things should kind of help you decide if you want to lower or compromise your bar with a hire. What kind of questions should an interviewer ask an interviewee to find out if they're motivated and they would be a valuable asset to the company? I would say being motivated and being a valuable asset to a company are not necessarily coupled. They're actually quite uniquely unrelated to each other. You have tons of motivated people who can't perform their jobs well, and you have a ton of people who can perform their jobs well, but just not motivated because they're so damn talented, it requires very little motivation for them to do the job well. So I'm going to answer this question in like 2 parts. The first thing is about the motivation part. So when you're interviewing a person, most interviews are like too long. They're like about an hour. I think 30 minutes is a good amount of time to really get the gist of the conversation going, right? And the reason for that is, when you're interviewing someone, you've already looked at the resume and you already decided to spend an hour or 30 minutes talking to this person. So you must like them enough on paper. And during this interview, you probably don't know it, but what you're trying to do is you're trying to figure out if they're lying on the resume. You're just trying to validate if those things are true that they said they did. And the second thing is you're trying to figure out, is this guy going to be an asshole? Is this person going to be hard to work with? Is this person easygoing? You're trying to figure out that personality part of it, right? But the funny thing about personality is it comes off in the first 5 minutes of your conversation. You've already probably made an assumption or a decision of what this person feels like very early in your interview. So it's a bit weird, but your gut feeling is not often that wrong. Your gut feeling is not often wrong. However, it might not be true, but yet it is how you feel about someone. So I wouldn't discredit your instincts so much. I would think it's actually quite valuable. Now, in the interview, you want to ask a lot of questions, seeing if they understand the role. Because if they really at least spent the time to research the role, they're clearly motivated enough that they want to do the role, right? If they don't know anything about the role and they're having a casual conversation, it's clearly obvious that they don't spend enough time really getting excited about this interview and then taking their time to prepare, right? And sometimes people might be really knowledgeable about the role, but they're not motivated by it. So they might have done this role a ton of times and they're probably really good at it, but they're not like, oh, I can't wait to work at your company doing the same thing I've always done, you know? So then it comes down to questions like where you're trying to figure out, okay, well, what's the driving force behind this person's career, right? You want to ask questions like, so, like, if you could do anything in this company, what would it do? What would you be doing? Asking kind of like open questions that allow people to creatively answer will tell you exactly how motivated they are about the topic. So, for example, if you're applying for a position like a product manager position, and you ask a question like, okay, so let's say you started tomorrow, what would you do in the first 30 days? If a person truly struggles to answer this question, either A, it's so open that they get a little lost. Doesn't mean they're not motivated, but it means they haven't really thought about the position in a deep way. And a person who answers, with a ton of details, and honestly, they could even be wrong, but the fact that they're so excited that they have a lot of insights into the role itself, that's probably a fantastic, cue that they are motivated. Now, valuable asset. This really comes down to the technical part of the interview, where you're trying to figure out what their skill set is. And so during an interview, what you want to do is you want to ask them about specifics of a project. And the easiest one is to ask them, how did they manage some of the work they've done in the past? And how did they manage the success or failure of those projects? And what were the key learnings and key metrics they looked at? If a person can't tell you what the key metrics of something they're working on was in the past, that means either A, they didn't really drive the work, or B, they just kind of were managed through it. So they didn't do a lot of the hands-on work. On the other hand, if someone's like super sharp, it was this metric, it was this much, I moved this, by this level of lift and whatever, if they're able to give you that level of detail, they are probably going to be able to execute quite fast as soon as they get into your organization. So understanding that they're different, understanding that the motivational part comes with a lot of the personality and the communication and the way the conversation is flowing. And on the valuable asset, it's all about the nitty-gritty technical details of what they've done. As long as they can elaborate and kind of speak to that very quickly, that means they have done things themselves and they have seen it go from beginning to end and all that stuff. This kind of person is automatically valuable. But then you want to obviously find the balance between both of these things to figure out if they're a fit for your organization. I have struggled a bit with the general framework questions like, how do you think product and development/tech should work together? Because this can be highly dependent on the stage of the company and the people in the organization. I think most open questions are very challenging, right? And they're challenging because the questions themselves don't have a clear answer. That's the problem. And so most people want to say the right thing. And I think the most important thing here is obviously to talk about your thought process. And in a scenario where that question is kind of broad and the answers could be in the different levels, like small company, big company, super big company, and those dynamics change. What you want to be able to do is express what are the key differences in each of those scenarios. So for example, with this question, the answer is something along the lines of, well, it depends a lot on the scale of the company, small, medium, large. And the evolution between the product and development teams, they change as that organization scales. And then for you independently, what you want to be able is you want to add detail on what would be different on a small or a medium or a big one. And I think once you can answer, that at a very high level strategy to show that you understand there is differences, and then you're able to go into the details of each of the differences, I think that's typically a very strong answer already. Of course, if it's correct in all that case. And then I think a nicer way to really roll this up into the actual interview is then to go, what size company is this company? What size do they think they are? What size is their actual maturity? And what are the things that are needed at that scale? So just expressing that there is a difference in the size of the company and how the answer to this question should be is already a sign of experience. Fantastic. But then digging deeper and kind of coming to an assessment of the size of the company already, and then going super deep into that, that will become a very powerful answer for sure. So you always want to think about the fact that when you're answering broad questions, you start the context of your answer also broad. Someone goes, well, how do you solve world hunger? Well, you're going to go, well, solving hunger is different in every country. So let me explain how I would solve it in a country that's more wealthy and a country that is less wealthy. And you start with that kind of setting the context, showing that you see the full picture and you see that there are differences, and then going into details of the one that is relevant to the company. What are good questions to ask from the interviewee's perspective? Let me start with the questions you should definitely stay away from, because that doesn't get talked about a lot. You don't want to ask questions that are related to the perks of the position. So questions like, is your company okay with working from home? Do you have flexible hours? How long do people work? What's the average time people come in? How often do the teams have meetings? Like, you don't want to ask those questions. I'm not saying they're not important. I'm just saying you might want to save those questions for your email follow-up to HR afterwards, which you should definitely write, by the way, all the time. So you want to ask questions that are open, right? Because for the interviewer, good questions for interviewees is actually quite open questions where you can understand their creativity, their thought process, you can talk through it. And for you, it's the same. You want to ask open questions at a company level, right? So, or at the minimum, a department level. So questions like, so in regarding the company's kind of strategy, like where do you see that evolving, in the next 3 years, and what are the biggest threats to that? Like questions in this kind of theme, those are great, because not only is it just challenging for the person who's gonna respond, it's also really fun to talk about these things because you don't both need to know the extreme details. You're able to have really high level discussions about directionally where company should go, what are some of the biggest issues that might happen, what's the evolution of the product, and all this kind of stuff. So you want to kind of ask these kind of big grand questions, and they're just funner to ask, and they're also funner to hear the answer of. Skip all the kind of super nitty-gritty details. How do the teams work together? What are your stand-ups like? How many people in the team? That stuff, follow with HR and do it in an email. Don't waste the precious time you have in an interview where you should be building a strong rapport and really understanding the role and understanding the person and just speaking to your interviewer like a normal human. That's what you really want to do. You want to have fun, open discussions. That's the key to strong interviewee questions.